Hey everyone. So, as I said, as the presenter said, my name is Wojtek Dziedzic, and today I would like to talk about approach to design which is emerging in popularity around the globe, growth design. I would like to explore it in both theory and practice. What it is, how is it helpful, and why you should follow some of these practices. And I will also share a little gift at the end of the presentation, so please do not fall asleep and stay tuned. But first, let's start with some context, and also giving me the clicker, all right? And by context, I mean, who am I, and what is Brainly? So Brainly is the leading learning platform worldwide, offering services to students, parents, and educators with the largest knowledge hub for all school subjects and grades. Our users can ask questions to a community of millions of students to receive answers, which are later vetted by Brainly experts. Suppose our users don't feel like reaching to our community. In that case, they can also access our repository of millions of pre-answered questions by experts with explanations, step-by-step instructions, hints, and tips. Realistically, not all questions can be sufficiently answered. So some of them have to be answered through the power of AI, in which case we give users the ability to quickly just snap a photo of a math problem in order to generate a solution. Those who have tougher questions can also reach to our community of tutors and quickly set up a one-to-one tutoring session in order to answer some of these more advanced problems. Some of these features have certain usage-based limitations which can be removed by purchasing the Brainly Plus plan. Brainly is accessible through a browser or an iOS and Android device. We have over 300 million users worldwide monthly, a repository of over 200 million answers, or 2,250,000 textbook solutions created by experts, as well as over 500,000 completed tutoring sessions. I work in the monetization team, where I am responsible for overall user experience and implementing user interface design and the implementation of our growth design strategy. There, I work and specialize with my team on expanding the value proposition through product improvements, on optimization of the payment funnel, monetization and maintenance of international markets like Brazil, US, and many others, as well as improvements to our design system. Now, a question that may come to mind is, isn't all of that incredibly complex? You have so many users, platforms, markets to work on. How do you add anything and make sure it doesn't just explode? And that's a fair assumption. And that's why also we need some sort of fail-safe to ensure that we are evolving the product in the right direction. And that fail-safe, in our case, is growth design. Growth design is an approach which combines strategic business competencies and user-focused problem solving. So growth designers focus equally on marketing opportunities, on scaling the business, as well as visual design, user interface design, UX, and many other things. So growth designers are sort of a bridge between user needs and business objectives. The growth in growth design is achieved through executing a growth design strategy, which typically starts as some sort of rough concept, and then through iterative improvements and experimentation, the final product delivery is achieved. As such, growth design is a direct answer to the field of dreams fallacy, a myth that states that all you need for customers to flock in is to have a standard product. Growth design may also sound similar to agile or lean, and that's intentional. People who pioneered a lot of the growth design practices were also familiar with those work frameworks, so they were inclined to apply a lot of the analogous practices to growth-oriented product design. So what is then that makes growth design so different? And I believe there are three things that are shown at different stages of design and development. When planning, it's the focus on user research and business metrics. When designing, it's a rapid and data-driven iterative mindset. And when deciding, it's the prioritization of long-term growth. Now, let's examine each of those areas one by one, starting with focus on user research and business metrics. And let's answer a very basic question first. What are metrics? I went to Brainly Undercover and asked this question to our community, and the answer I got is pretty good. Metrics are what you measure to gauge performance or progress within a company. So metrics are a business unit of performance, and as such, they are what we call quantitative data. Data which we can quantify, or in simpler terms, count, numbers. Understanding the utility of metrics is paramount for growth designers, especially that of KPIs. KPIs are the key targets which represent your strategically most essential outcomes. Key performance indicators, or KPIs, provide clear directions for product improvement, clear up any decision-making doubts, and guide team members to focus on only the most fruitful of opportunities. KPIs are often not even a metric in itself, but also a combination of different metrics. For example, the amount of active users paying a subscription fee. You have two different metrics here that make up a single KPI. Now, that being said, quantitative data is only as useful as you can make it. So you need to know some data analysis basics. To be fully transparent, I'm not a data analyst, and I cannot do the work a full-time data analyst can. However, that's completely OK. What I need as a designer is just to know those data analysis basics with a little help from qualified data people. One of those basics is the rule of cause and effect. The rule of cause and effect states that the goal of data analysis and research is to identify causal relationships, that one thing directly causes another thing to happen. Generally, the rule of cause and effect reiterates a famous adage that correlation isn't causation, and I think we've all heard it. And what it states is that you cannot assume a cause and effect relationship based on correlation alone. So while sunshine does correlate and cause plant growth, ice cream sales going up only correlate with plant growth, but they are not in themselves in a causal relationship. Bright summer sun is the independent variable which correlates with and causes both things to happen simultaneously. Another example of this principle in action is when you look at data in the United States, the per capita consumption of mozzarella cheese and civil engineering doctorates awarded are correlating. However, you would have to be insane to actually say that one thing directly causes another here. And what is just more likely is that there's another third independent variable which influences both of the things to correlate. Or either that, or I just should have eaten more mozzarella cheese before coming up on the stage. Now, logic dictates that an independent variable must occur first in time before the dependent variable. That for there to be a cause and effect relationship, the causing factor needs to happen first. When you are working on an experiment by yourself, it's pretty easy to do since you are controlling all the factors. However, from the outside looking in, when you're analyzing existing data, it's much harder to do. For example, where we were analyzing retention-causing factors at Brainly, we noticed that there is correlation between Brainly tutor usage and retention. However, based on that knowledge alone, we just couldn't decide which actually causes which. We didn't know whether it's Brainly tutor usage that causes people to return more, or whether retention is a prerequisite for people to return, for people to use Brainly tutor in the first place. So we needed to run more experiments to actually answer this question. And how do we know that the data of experiments we are looking at is correct in the first place? Statistical significance is the answer. It helps you determine how likely it is that the experiment results can be attributed to the change you've made instead of just pure chance. The reason why this is so important is that whenever you run an experiment on your user base, you're not actually showing it to everyone. You're only showing it to a select test sample, which may not represent your entire user base faithfully. And it may lead you to the sampling error, which is when you have false assumptions based on showing data, showing information to people who do not exemplify your entire user base. One way to get around it is to simply increase the size of your test sample. Think about it this way. If you flip a coin 5 times and you flip a coin 500 times, the more times you flip, the more likely it is you will end up with an even average of heads and tails. Another way to visualize statistical significance is through the variation graph. So here we have two different graphs which compare the amount of users per time spent. The average in both of these is the same. However, if you were to choose a random point in either of those, it's just more likely you will deviate from the average in the graph on the right with a greater variation, and thus making the results less reliable. This is also how we calculate the probability value, so the likelihood of your experiments being trustworthy. Another way to get around the sampling error is to simply be more precise in how you run your experiments. You can do that through the cohort analysis. A cohort is a group of users which could be characterized by a single trait. For example, at Brainly, we don't just look at logged in and unlogged users. We separate those groups into further groups based on their behavioral patterns. Why this is so important? Here's a use case of this in practice. When we were running an analysis of Brainly users, we noticed that we have a lot of traffic coming from Google search results. However, that traffic wasn't really likely to activate, to create an account. So we sort of flipped the data on its head and we asked ourselves a question. Who are then the users who do decide to stay? And based on data analysis, we now had a knowledge on which entry-level actions correlate with activation. We used that knowledge to create an achievement system that incentivized or rewarded activation. So thanks to this, we saw growth throughout our activation funnel. Now, sometimes you just don't have traffic data. Maybe your product is too small. Or maybe whenever you look at quantitative data, it just doesn't answer all of your questions. And in those cases, you might use qualitative data. Qualitative data is descriptive information which you cannot quantify. And it can be collected a number of ways: user surveys, interviews, user test sessions, anything, and much other things. Now, the idea here is not to use qualitative or quantitative data just in separation from everything else, but rather to use them both simultaneously. Quantitative data will point you in the direction of what to ask users about during, for example, user test interviews, or qualitative data will point you in the direction of what to look for during quantitative data analysis. Qualitative data can be deductive or inductive, depending on whether the researcher has some sort of agenda or question, or whether they are just trying to establish patterns in data in the first place. There are certain advantages to using qualitative data. It provides detailed insights into user behavioral patterns, shows users' thought processes when using the product, and it clarifies users' expectations. However, there are certain shortcomings in qualitative data. For example, the Houghton effect, where your test subjects change the responses based on the fact they know they are being recorded and that the responses are being collected. The sampling bias, which is similar to the sampling error from before, where your participants exhibit certain behaviors which are not really exemplary of your entire user base and lead you to false assumptions. The way to get around it is to simply ask some preliminary questions whenever you're recruiting people, like their background or whether they are familiar with your product. The recency bias is the tendency to place too much emphasis on experiences that are the most recent, even though they are not reliable. And you might want to get around it by implementing a bit of asymmetry between your users' interviews or user test sessions. Now, sometimes you don't have time for either qualitative or quantitative data research, and there are certain shortcuts you can take in those situations. First one of these is the disk research, where you try to look at your repository of previously conducted researches and try to reapply those findings into your current project. Benchmarking, when you analyze other products and try to set some base level of quality to strive towards. You are not really reinventing the wheel, probably, and you are not creating your product in a vacuum, so you might as well just take a look at what the competition is doing. Product auditing is similar, where you are examining your own product and trying to see what works, what doesn't, trying to empathize with the user through a cognitive walkthrough. Now, there is no shame in actually using those shortcuts. In fact, we use them at Brainly so often that we have custom mirror templates just to make their effectiveness and fast-track the discovery phase even more. So if you're just starting out, sometimes it's worth to also explore your product fits. First one of these is the product channel fits, to be wary of whether you're promoting your app, your product, in places where potential users may most likely be. The reason why this is so important is that so here's a use case. So whenever we were promoting certain aspects of our subscription, we noticed that a lot of people didn't actually open the emails we sent them, even after they purchased the plan. So they weren't really aware of what they even paid for. So instead of relying on an effective communication method, we moved a lot of the information that was visible in those emails and moved it to the redesigned new payment form. Another one is the product incentive fit, where you try to find the overlap between user expectations and your product. Here's a use case of how that's important. When we were introducing our Brainly tutor feature, we communicated it very matter-of-factly that it's a way for you to contact a verified tutor for a one-on-one chat. And we noticed that users didn't really bite. The conversion rate was really lagging behind. So we tried to ask ourselves, OK, what doesn't work here? And we experimented with the messaging in one of our entry points. And we noticed that one of those entry points really stood out. It's where we communicated the feature based on the benefit, the core value of the product, where you can get a verified answer from an expert in minutes. And we saw the conversion increase skyrocket to over 1,000%. So we quickly sniffed opportunity, and we seized it. We reapplied those findings from the single experiment to all placements in our user flow, the payment form, all landing pages, and everywhere else. Of course, these weren't just random guesses. We actually did conduct a lot of research to determine that this is what we wanted to work on, that this is what users are interested in, and we applied those findings and tested them through experimentation. Now, to summarize, the reason why focus on user research and business metrics is so important is that it gives you a good idea of what to focus on during the next step, during designing, when you should have a rapid and data-driven iterative mindset. I believe that the backbone of proper growth-oriented processes are well-defined hypotheses. Hypotheses are assumptions which are proposed to explain some sort of phenomenon. In product design, they could be used to identify opportunities for growth. A good hypothesis is based on all the data and research we went through before. It verifies the most fundamental aspects of your ideas, and it is verifiable with minimum effort. It's particularly useful when you're running a minimum viable test. A minimum viable test is an offshoot of the popular MVP, minimum viable product concept. A minimum viable test is an experiment that leverages the amount of effort to verify an idea and its viability. So it's a bare-bones version of a feature which is just meant to measure its potential. A minimum viable test hypothesis is structured in a certain way which answers questions, like how, what should you implement in the product, where the change in the user journey should be made, when should the experiment start and for how long, who, what user cohorts should you target, with, what is the projected impact and on which metrics, and why. Why do you believe that the experiment will actually succeed? When we are running a test that would improve retention on our new navigation, this is the hypothesis we structured. Introducing communication, flow, and interaction changes inside the site-way navigation on desktop and mobile devices for 14 days to unlock basic and subscribed users will result in a retention lift of 3% and a maintained level of engagement metrics because of the improved visibility of features and a streamlined user flow. Formulating an MBT hypothesis gives your team members a clear and easy goal to focus on. And you can use it, actually, as your next Agile sprint goal. That way, your stakeholders have a good idea of what you're working on and why. So not only is it useful for product design, it's useful for alignment between the teams and also for product management. Now, let's go a step back. How do you decide on what to create hypotheses for in the first place? The answer is you should probably decide it in a team, collaboratively. Cyclical growth meetings are a frequent meeting where team members get familiar with the findings made during discovery, where team analyzes and discusses those findings, then workshop and brainstorm ideas for improvement. Growth meetings' collaborative nature is incredibly important. It creates an environment where the expertise is amplified because of converging competencies. 2 + 2 = 5, as team members generate unpredictable ideas they couldn't have come up with on their own. Now, your ability to prioritize ideas is also important. You may generate a lot of ideas, but at the end of the day, you need to work on something. And the ability to prioritize ideas is in large part reliant on your ability to predict your future and your objective opinions. So it's very dubious. However, there are ways to make it more scientific and objective. For example, RICE scoring, a system of evaluating ideas that we use in the monetization team. RICE compares reach, impact, confidence, and effort of ideas. Reach is the projected number of users targeted during the experiment's run. Impact captures the expected improvement of the metric being focused on. Even with a collection of only high-impact ideas, you still need to score them in relation to each other. Confidence measures how strong the teams believe the ideas will produce the expected outcome. Previous researches can be used to prove a lot of the claims made during the scoring, and experiment iterations are just more reliant by default. Effort determines how much time and effort needs to be spent working on an idea, and which ideas are low-hanging fruits, low risk, high reward, and which ideas are just overly ambitious. Reach, impact, and confidence should be measured in a certain way. Reach in rounded up traffic data, impact in scores from 3 to 0.25, confidence in scores from 100 to less than 50, and effort in person months. Then you take all of those scores and you put them in the Rice equation, which spits out an easy to follow score of the idea. Now, all you need to do is to take this equation and apply it to a whole table of different ideas. For example, if your idea is to change the copywriting on a single page, the reach and impact will be low, and the score will also be low. However, if you want to change your copywriting across your entire product lineup, the reach will be higher, and impact will be higher as well, making it the most likely to succeed. And this is actually what we use to implement the idea which I described before about brainy tutor and the over 1,000% increase in conversion. So it was a team decision to work on that. If you don't have traffic data, you might want to use the I-score, which compares impact, confidence, and ease of implementation. And the equation looks like this. Or the DICE score, which replaces traffic data with the projected revenue. And the equation looks like this. If you're looking for less out there methods, something simpler, when it comes to evaluating ideas, you might want to try the impact effort matrix. It compares the impact and effort of ideas. So it helps you in a simple way see which ideas are low-hanging fruits, low risk, high reward, and which ideas are just frankly pointless. It's a very simple way to score ideas relative to each other in a team collaborative fashion. Now, let's get down to business literally. How do you bring your ideas to life? The design process itself in growth design is really nothing special. It's just opening Figma or Sketch and just doing whatever you're typically doing. However, the approach to design is quite different. So often, development teams fall into the trap of waterfall development, where the team plays a game of hot potato. Everyone just takes their work and moves it to another person. The project typically ends in the maintenance of the idea. However, in most cases, it's just replaced in favor of a new, exciting project. Continuous discovery habits offers a more structured, cost-effective, and precise alternative. It's a development approach which prioritizes sustainability. It spreads the discovery and research process across multiple iterations, with adjustments to the development plan being applied as the project continues to generate new insights. So instead of just focusing on the discovery phase at the beginning stages of the project, when your understanding of the core issue is limited, you spread it across the duration of the entire project. Continuous discovery habits include things like creating a business case for what should be improved, discovery phase and all the data stuff we mentioned before, alignment with your team in order to be better familiar with those ideas, conducting growth meetings, and defining the opportunity solution tree. Opportunity solution trees are a way to visualize your development roadmap that's based on research and collaboration and focuses on outcome over output. The outcome itself is typically some sort of measurable metric increase and product delivery. So, for example, it could be something like improved subscription rate of a free-to-use product. Now, you cannot tackle a problem like this just head-on. You need to be more strategic, and you need to narrow down which opportunities lie within. For example, redesigning entry points, reworking the payment flow, or reworking the messaging. Now, you need to narrow down those opportunities too. Like, maybe during benchmarking, you noticed how your competition offers some trial period. Or maybe users during user test sessions mentioned how they like a new payment method. Or maybe you noticed in your quantitative analysis how most people just subscribe to the annual plan, and that's what we'd like to prioritize. So then you take the opportunity here, for example, the adding new payment methods, and you create solutions based on that. For example, it could be implementing Apple Pay, PayPal, or Klarna. Now, what you need to do is to just validate the idea. For example, run a fake DUR test and see whether people are actually interested in it, see if it has any potential. Then through continuous product improvement, step by step, seeing what works, what doesn't, you try to learn about whether this is actually something that will stick. Now, opportunity solution trees help increase the experimentation tempo. And as you experiment more, your experimentation tempo snowballs. Your understanding of the core outcome expands as you continue to implement new things and learn more and more about the relationship between your product and its users. Your project and the discovery phase morph into a single process. Now, opportunity solution trees are not a one-size-fits-all solution. Product teams often have to deal with codependencies and deadlines, but even in those cases, you still need to be the advocate for the best design practices possible with your stakeholders. For example, you might use the tool known as the growth funnel, which is a high-level outline of how you acquire new engaged users. The customer journey map, a step-by-step map of how an average user may experience your product. The aha moment, a single moment of the customer journey where the user recognizes the core value offered by the product. And the hook model, which is a way of describing behaviors in terms of how likely they are to form a habit by using a product. The fog behavior model, a model which compares the two pulleys of human behavior, the motivation and ability to perform an action, or fake do tests. Some fake or unfinished version of a feature, which looks legit enough so it can be used to generate the interest of users, and the potential could be measured. Now, what to do after the experiment finishes? This is a question that inevitably comes up. The answer is, a data analyst should create a data report, and then the growth designer takes the data report and tries to expand the initial claims made by it, since he or she is an expert in product design and usability. The fruit of this collaboration is most commonly just another experiment, which is typically an iteration of the previous idea. This fits into this analyze, ideate, prioritize, test cycle, which could have been heard more during the last presentation that we gave here as Brainly. But for now, let's answer a very simple question. What do you do after you run the entire experiment, you have the results? Where does this continuous cycle of improvement actually lead to? And the answer is the prioritization of long-term growth. Previously, we covered how KPIs are important for growth designers. But can metrics actually be used as goals? I mean, there's so many of them. How do you know which ones matter and which ones don't? There are certain ways to subdivide your metrics depending on how important they are. For example, dividing them into pirate metrics like acquisition, activation, revenue, referral, and revenue, or just metrics specific to your product. Either way, you should know which growth levers they fall into. So, for example, if you focus on improving the subscription rate of your product, you should focus on the recurrency funnel. And if you focus on the acquiring as many users as possible because you are just starting out with your new startup and you want to have as many new interested users, you may want to focus on the activation funnel. Another way to use metrics as goals is to use the fundamental growth equation. It's a simple equation which takes metrics, for example, metrics connected to your bottom line, metrics connected to engagement, could be used to generate the revenue growth and potential for growth. Now, it is a bit simplistic and arbitrary, but it's kind of the point. It's just supposed to give you a good idea of what to focus on in the vast sea of data noise. Another way to use data as goals is to use the growth flywheel. A flywheel is a device which uses the conservation of angular momentum to store rotational energy. I have no clue what that means, but apparently the growth flywheel uses a similar principle, where you separate your user flow into separate phases, where one phase directly accelerates another phase. The most common way is to separate it into three phases. Attract, where you should catch the user's attention and make sure that they are rewarded with the best experience possible. Engage, where you hook your user to the site's content and you make the experience as frictionless as possible. And the delight stage, where you reward the user with a little bit extra something so that the likelihood of them coming back or recommending your product is increased. Those methods may appear a bit arbitrary, in which case you might want to use the North Star metric. The North Star is what is actually a real-life star which has been used in seafaring navigation for decades. It's a star which appears almost as it's fixed in the night sky and almost as if all other stars revolve around it. And the North Star metric is similar. It's the metric which captures the core value of your product. It helps your team focus on the most important opportunities. For example, at a monetization team, you might want to focus on the revenue generated as the North Star metric. And it would answer the very basic question you might have at the end of the day. How well do you take care of your bottom line? A metric that would not be a good North Star metric is the amount of subscribers you have. And the reason for that is it doesn't include things like cancellations or refunds, which also have a result on your bottom line. So it wouldn't answer the very basic question you have at the end of the day. Now, should an entire company be beholden to the North Star metric or just select few teams? Well, the answer is it depends on how you want to apply growth design practices in your organization. There's the standalone model, where the growth team is a separate entity experimenting across a full range of product lineup. They support other teams and act as internal analyst group that can jump in to optimize product areas. The product-led model is what is the most resembling of what we have at Brainly, where each team is in charge of a product area. The focus of those teams can be incredibly narrow. So we have at Brainly a team which is focused entirely on the revenue generated by the tutoring feature. And the scope may appear incredibly restricting, but in reality, it allows the team to focus on one of Brainly's key success metrics in way more detail than a team with a much broader focus. Now, there are certain issues with the product-led model that we experience on a day-to-day work. And they are mostly connected to creating a cohesive product development roadmap. And there are ways to get around it. For example, planning ahead to roughly conceptualize future iterations so that the implementation of ideas further down the development funnel is easier. When we were working on improvements to our cancellation flow, we had a lot of different ideas we wanted to validate. So we started experimenting one by one, seeing what works, what doesn't work. However, some of these ideas were just incredibly hard to develop even after the initial few iterations. So we knew that since the beginning of the project that we wanted to focus on those. And with that in mind, we created a place where we could address those secondary, hard-to-develop opportunities that in a way which wouldn't require more work in the future. We created an alternatives wall where we could validate those and put in a lot of the ideas that we had and run fake-dur tests in order to see whether they have any potential or not. We didn't need to work on any workarounds because we already made that possible. Another way you can avoid some of the product-led model issues is to merge ideas. Connecting the dots between projects is recommended as it helps you to create a cohesive product development strategy greater than the sum of its parts across teams. For example, when we were working the cancellation flow, another team was working on having some special offers through partnerships with third-party companies. And we knew about it, which is why we created a concept of how that may apply to our cancellation flow. So now we had some sort of idea of how we might combine those concepts in a way that would make sense in the light of the more broad development strategy. So to summarize, if you plan everything correctly, you identify the right areas for improvement, you map out the opportunities to capitalize on, you craft your hypothesis properly, you verify the right assumptions in your experiment, and you analyze the experiment results correctly and decide what to do next. Of course, there's way more to talk about. However, the intent is not to go overboard with all the explanations in such a short time. The original draft of my presentation took over 2 hours to complete, so there was no feasible way for me to actually include everything. And instead, I structured the way to pick your interest in just some of the things you might be curious about in particular. And I know that may sound a bit discouraging, which is why I created a single page where you can read a lot of the things I cut out of the presentation. It's called the Growth Design Handbook, and you can visit right now by scanning the QR code on the page. And I would show it to you, but I was kicked out of the Wi-Fi. But anyway, you can go there, you can click on any of the articles, and it will be expanded in much more detail than I covered here today. And I will also have there some links, recommendations, use cases of those practices that I covered today and that I cut out of my presentation scope. I wanted to make it digestible in tidbits, so whenever you are in your day-to-day work and maybe you want to see some good things to use as inspiration, or maybe whenever you have a break, or maybe you are commuting to work, or maybe you're sitting on a toilet, you will now have something to read and just 5 minutes and learn about. Right, it's an early draft, so it's a minimum viable test. I just want to measure the interest. So keep your expectations low, but still I hope it will be helpful. A lot of these articles there are still interesting to read through. And I also attached a form where you can reach out to me, and also a LinkedIn link to my profile, so you can say that it's cool, hey, can you add some more things? Or maybe you just want to say it sucks, in which case you're also welcome. If you're interested in more case studies, you're open to visit our Medium page, where we cover more of that. So I hope with today, with all of that covered, you'll now have a basic understanding of what growth design is, how it prioritizes long-term growth, how it focuses on user research and business metrics, and how it's about a rapid and data-driven iterative development. Or in other words, how you should always measure your assumptions. All right, so thanks for listening, and thanks to DesignWaves for giving me the opportunity to share the stage with so many amazing speakers, both today and yesterday. You can use the links here to find me or find Brainly, or you can scan the QR code right on the slide right now. And yeah, you can reach out to me, you can follow Brainly, whatever works for you. So right, thanks for listening once again, and I think we can now get into questions. We have time for that.
Wojtek, Dziedzic. No to teraz czas na pytania. Tam, przepraszam, tam
Okay, it's time for questions. We have one question in the back.
Okay, it works. So first of all, thank you for a great presentation. I believe it's very important to combine qualitative and quantitative data and to share this knowledge on events like this one. And I also seen some glimpses of both Craig Sullivan and the Growth Tribe, so congrats again, it's great. And I have a question regarding how to learn this, apart from using your website and your Medium profile, of course. Because if what I interpreted here is correct, I see that you combined service design and growth hacking. And this is how you created your I would say, how to call it, methodology. Yes, methodology. So there are many other sources, probably. I could name a few, but maybe you have some other recommendations, some courses. Of course, there is service design, there is growth hacking, like Growth Tribe I've mentioned. Maybe you have any other suggestions.
Yeah, so you said it yourself that there's a lot of books that you can use to learn more about the methodology, which I based basically the entire presentation around. There are 3 recommendations that I would give in particular. So the first one is the book called Growth Hacking. It covers a lot of what we were talking about today in much more detail. Another book is Continuous Discovery Habits. So it's about much of the same that we also talked about today, and it also covers it in more detail. Another book that I recommend is Hooked, which is about retention and how you might use design to increase the likelihood of retention. So those are the 3 recommendations that I would give. Of course, I mean, you may ask other people, they may give other recommendations, but that's just how I view it.
Okay, we have the question somewhere here.
Cześć, super prezentacja. Mam nadzieję, że nie obrazisz się, jak zadam pytanie po polsku.
I hope you don't mind if I ask a question in Polish. Great. Okay, listen. Since you act globally, I believe that you also have global tests. So I assume that depending on the region and cultural issues, the results are different. So my question is about your approach to the fact that you run this ABC test, and the C variant is better in Portugal, and the A variant works well in Great Britain. Okay, I'll answer in Polish too. Well, it all depends. It all depends on what we work on. There are cases where we know that people are used to different practices on different markets. For example, I have this example from the Brazilian market where people are used to paying in installments. So where we had this plan as divided by months, people thought that they would pay 10 per month and not 120 that we would take on day one from them for the entire year. So we asked people from the community support, we also get some mails, and when people are angry at us, then we know that we have to approach things differently. Well, the Brainly product is quite cohesive, but there are markets where we focus on the differences depending on the expectations and demands of the users, of the local users. Are there any other questions? Okay, I'm looking for questions. Yes, there's one question.
Thanks for our presentation. I would like to ask, you mentioned a lot of different methodologies, and I would like to ask what top 3 tools or methods do you use in Brainly on daily basis? Thanks.
It really depends. So, you know, whenever you're working on something, you try to apply the best practices that work for the specific use case. I would say that the practices, the tools that we use most often is definitely the opportunity solution tree. So we try to craft some sort of long-term approach for a quarter or 2 quarters or even more, depending on the project. And then sort of you just, the other methods that we use are just come out of it. So for example, in some solutions that we want to implement, we might want to look at our growth levers, like what is actually the most important for this growth lever in terms of recurring payers. Or maybe in some cases it's better to use the fake-do test in order to just validate some idea that would be hard to develop, but we know we want to work on it in the future. So the answer is, you know, maybe not really satisfying, but it really depends on whatever you're working on.